Recruitment. This is the big question of how you actually get your citizens together. And it's built on the first presentation we heard by Ian. Once you have a question, once you know what you want to discuss, you actually need the people to do so. So a quick rundown through the process, and we'll go through these slides in a bit more detail. What is a principle that you have in just about every Citizens Assembly is this principle of random selection. You want the group to be randomly selected from your population, be this a city, the country, it can be just a small community, that does not matter, but the randomness is important. And this is a principle behind recruitment, that every single person can look at the assembly and say, yeah, I could have been there. That could have been me. That's my place. And also in the process itself, that maybe your neighbor got the letter if you didn't, or maybe your cousin who lives in a different part of the city did. These sort of stories, they get around, and you know in a while that, yeah, somebody who I know got that invitation. That's part of this randomness. So how do you do this, basically? There are several steps to this. You send out invitations. Participants register their interest. If they want to participate, you basically do a stratification, a random selection out of those who have registered interest in order to get your Citizens Assembly. This is just a quick run through, and we'll go through these steps. By the way, this is taken from the Fidesz manual on doing a random selection. It's referenced at the end, and you can find it online. So what do I want to do? Run with you in these upcoming 15 to 20, 25 minutes. First, to demystify recruitment. Because when we usually speak, and I know there's a large difference of knowledge in the room from expert down to novice. So demystifying recruitment is one of these steps. What is it about, basically? How do you do this? Explain recruitment and representativeness, what it means, why you need it, and why you need it to be random in this sense. To discuss political legitimacy, what is the connection between the group of people you have in the room and the legitimacy of the whole process that you have in the end. I'll give you some examples of invitations that have been sent out to citizens. I'll introduce random sortition and sortition criteria. Again, just an introduction. This is not an in-depth course. I just have 20 minutes. I'll address some challenges in recruitment as well. And these are open questions, basically, to which I don't have an answer and to which there are no clear solutions. It's something that's still discussed. And doing this, I'll present the Citizens Assembly of Mostar that happened in 2021 as a case study while we run through this. So let's start with Mostar. Mostar is a city in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It has this famous old bridge. There was a war in this city where you basically had the two major communities fighting against each other. And the conflict carries on into politics today. So you basically have politicians from different groups representing different groups not being able to make decisions for the city. The city ran without elections for 12 years, and it did not have a stable government for a very long time before that. And as you can imagine, after time, the problems, the day-to-day issues, they pile up. There was a huge pile of unresolved policy issues that needed to be addressed. And this is the group of people who addressed them. These are not politicians. These are your randomly selected citizens who came together in Mostar and tried to overcome one of these issues. So it's a bit blurry. So you can see that, even though it's blurry, you can see that they sort of capture the diversity of a group. There's older people, younger people. And by the way, the masks, this was during COVID, so challenging environment. We still managed to get them together. And this group actually managed to set recommendations for their politicians. So it was held over 4 weekends in 2021. Usually when we describe a Citizens Assembly, there is this phrase, a city in a room or a country in a room. Basically, you want to be able to fit all those people in a room. Even if it's this size, even if it's a huge auditorium, it should be one space. The topic itself, and this was also an innovation, was selected by a group of citizens, stakeholders, and officials. Basically, anybody could propose a topic in the initial stage. This was narrowed down through a selection process that involved NGOs, civil society, and then also elected stakeholders. The final vote went out to citizens in a survey. The topic that they selected, and that was top on all of these by all of these groups, was city cleanliness. When I said a huge amount of problems piled up in Mostar, well, garbage did too. And this was an unresolved issue, how to deal with that. And in connection with this is also the maintenance of public spaces, which was not resolved completely by governance, of course. So the assembly itself was co-convened by the City of Mostar and the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe. Bringing those two together, the City of Mostar did not have the means to finance this. This was done through a mechanism of the Council of Europe. That's also very important to point out. Sometimes, in difficult places, these sorts of assemblies cannot work without some form of assistance from the outside or from donors. 47 citizens were randomly selected as a representative sample of the city as such. The implementation structure of the whole thing, and we'll talk this through a little bit more when we go into the governance session in the afternoon, consisted of a design team, a coordinating team, an oversight team. I won't talk about this now. Basically, following sort of a general procedure, there was a learning phase, there was deliberative phase, and there was also a feedback phase together with decision makers. There was a final vote on the recommendations. It's a standard, more or less standard procedure. The citizens adopted 32 recommendations in total in 5 thematic areas. So grouped into competences and who should do the work, basically, on this. Now, the thing that makes this a success is that the City Council adopted an action plan to implement all of these recommendations in the same year. They're still under implementation. Half of them have been either fully implemented or to a large degree. And by the way, some of them were extremely simple, but you need that smart citizen to tell somebody that trash cans in a frequented area need to be emptied twice a day, not once. And you also have these very difficult recommendations like, you should complete that sports hall you started 10 years ago, and you should reform your city administration to reduce corruption. There are difficult issues there, but also pretty simple ones. Showing that you can deliver on the simple ones gives some confidence that you might be thinking about the others as well. So let's have a look at how this panned out. This is a short video for 3 minutes.
Skupština građana Mostara održana u 7. mjesecu 2021. godine je organizirana u sklopu prvog deliberativnog procesa organiziranog u Bosni i Hercegovini i jugoistočnoj Europi. Skupština je okupila na jednom mjestu 47 nasumično odabranih građanki i građana Mostara koji predstavljaju demografsku kompoziciju grada. Učesnici su se sastali tokom 4 uzastopna vikenda kako bi učili, raspravljali i kreirali preporuke ka lokalnim vlastima Mostara, a po pitanju poboljšanja čistoće javnih prostora i kako bi Mostar postao prijatniji za sve građane. Tema Skupštine je odabrana nakon konsultacija s građanima, radionice sa organizacijama civilnog društva, akademskom zajednicom i predstavnicima gradskog vijeća i administracije koji su zajednički prepoznali ovu tematiku kao najvažniju za grad Mostar. Pravila i procedure Skupštine zasnovane na specifično izrađenoj metodologiji za grad Mostar su definirane u pravilniku koji je kreirao dizajn tim. Logistički aspekti Skupštine su organizirani od strane koordinacionog tima, dok je cjelokupan proces poštivanja pravilnika i rada Skupštine nadgledan od strane nadzornog tima. Ova 3 tima činila su upravljačku strukturu Skupštine. Članovi Skupštine imali su priliku da uče po pitanju teme od 15 međunarodnih i lokalnih eksperata i partnera koji su podijelili iskustvo i znanje uživo i online, dijeleći različite perspektive i prijedloge po pitanju teme. Također su saslušali o primjerima dobrih praksi drugih gradova u zemlji i regionu i dobili informacije od predstavnika gradske administracije. Nakon faze učenja, učesnici Skupštine su raspravljali u grupama uz stručnu podršku moderatora, te su izradili preporuke u sklopu 5 tematskih cjelina. Predstavnici svih političkih stranaka u gradskom vijeću su imali priliku da daju svoje mišljenje po pitanju radne verzije preporuka. Gradonačelnik Mostara se također obratio Skupštini građana. U finalnoj fazi Skupštine građanke i građani su glasali i usvojili 32 preporuke koji su upućene ka gradskim vlastima. Kao odgovor na preporuke, Gradsko vijeće grada Mostara je na svojoj sjednici u 11. mjesecu usvojilo akcioni plan za sprovođenje preporuka. Skupština građana je istakla grad Mostar kao predvodnika deliberativne demokracije i kao pozitivan primjer koji je vrijedan pažnje. Dodatne informacije o procesu su dostupne na web stranici www.mostargradimo.ba. Proces je organiziran u sklopu projekta Razvoj demokratskog učešća u gradu Mostaru koji implementira Kongres lokalnih i regionalnih vlasti Vijeća Europe i koji je rezultat rada Kongresove grupe za refleksiju o Mostaru kao dio akcionog plana Vijeća Europe za Bosnu i Hercegovinu za period od 2018. do 2021. godine.
That was Mostar in a picture, basically. The citizens you saw were citizens who are, in their makeup, quite diverse. And the question that I want to go through with you today is, how do you get from this to this? How do you make sure that the first picture is pretty much represented equally in the second picture, in terms of the makeup of the people that you see there? It's not a simple question. Now, other forms of citizens' engagement that we do know, like town hall meetings, they also result in some form of participation. But you usually get citizens who are engaged anyway. Somebody spoke here of highly educated citizens. And so I like to use like pendulums to try to visualize this. If you ask for a town hall meeting, you will get this first thing here. The people who are interested will always show up. And these are on this spectrum over here. But if you use a pendulum that has several joints in it, you get this complete randomness, where basically anyone who would want could show up. And it's not just about your interest, it is also about providing the opportunities that come with this interest. And I'll go through a few of those later on. So, why is it important to have a representative group of people discussing a topic? It's a simple question. Does any of you have an answer to this? Does any of you want to propose an answer to this? I like questions, putting questions here. Yes? Legitimacy. Good. Legitimacy of the process. Okay. Legitimacy through PR. Okay, so input, getting input from citizens on issues that care about. Let's take it over here.
Representative also means diverse. You tend to get better.
Exactly, diversity of views and viewpoints that you can fit into a room. Remember, we're still talking about a room here. You can touch, yes? Exactly, and exchanging views amongst these different mindsets. You covered a few of my points already. So, legitimacy, that's one of these things. It's very important for politics, for decision makers, to be able to rely on a process that has been thoroughly discussed by a randomly selected group of citizens in order to say, it's not just us who find that this is an important issue, it is a representative sample of your city or community that thinks that this is important. Legitimacy is, as Eve mentioned, it's the key word that you want to have behind the entire process. You design for legitimacy. The recruitment process and the randomness in the selection is also a key part in designing for legitimacy. You want diversity, representativeness of people, of views, this ability to have as many inputs as possible in a room and to be able to allow those to sort of communicate between each other. That's also key, because then you will have different opinions. You will have these opinions represented in the discussion. So if you would, doesn't matter which country you come from, if you would do, let's say, analysis of the members of your parliament, how many of them have higher education degrees? Usually the percentage is around 80%, up to 90%. Sometimes it's even all of them. How many of your citizens have higher education degrees? Never more than 50%. In almost all countries of the world, it's below 50. In some places, it's below 25. So even there, on this very simple metric, you have a huge disproportion. If you would look at, excluding Scandinavian countries now, how many members of your parliament are women? Again, you get a huge disproportion. In my country, it's very few, about 10%. And that's not representative. So this is a process where you get representation, you get legitimacy, you get diversity, you get different opinions. That's why you need a representative group. Now, how do you achieve this? Any ideas? Okay, I'll skip on this one. So, recruitment is a first real challenge for organizers. When you run a process, you usually are able to figure out a question, to see what is in the interest of citizens. You're able to figure out a date, who you want to bring together to discuss these issues. And then you think of, okay, how am I going to get these random citizens in a room? Selecting the random sample, let's say for somebody who has not done this before, who is organizing their first assembly ever, is their first real challenge. And in this case, it's this balance between a process that involves reaching out to people, saying that everybody can participate, everybody can take part in this, but then also saying that, well, not necessarily everyone will be part. The can be and the will are not the same here. And this is why it's also important to, when reaching out, emphasize this randomness. To emphasize that everybody can become part of the assembly, but it's not us who will decide this. It's essentially the roll of a dice or the algorithm in a computer, which is what we do today. So how to reach out to citizens and the random selection of the invitees. That's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. And the first step in all of this are letters of expression, letters and expressions of interest. It's in the first slide as well. You send out invitations, basically. You send out invitations to a large number of citizens in your community to respond if they are interested in taking part in such a process. And this is the letter we sent out in Mostar. It's slightly oversized. You can probably see that. It's not your average electricity bill or a bank statement. And it says right on the cover of it, this letter has been delivered to 44,999 addresses in Mostar, including yours and yours. Don't miss the chance to take part in the first Citizens Assembly ever organized in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In some letters, you also put that your participation will be enumerated, which is a further incentive for them to reply. Inside that envelope, you find a small little flyer, and you find this, which is a letter that is signed by the mayor of Mostar. You don't get a letter signed by a mayor every day, so at least it gives you some kind of official invitation to take this seriously. You might read through it, actually, even though it's a long letter, I must admit. And within this, you also have information that you will be enumerated, when it will take place. And in addition to this, on the second side, you have the sort of ability to register your interest in taking part in such an assembly. I'll have a few more examples later on. So what information should be in this first stage of recruitment, in the information letter? First, the basic information about the assembly itself and who is convening it. There should be some city coat of arms or other graphics that signify that this is actually something that is official. It should be signed by an official of the city. There should be information about the topic and the remit. What is it that these citizens will be discussing? Potentially you. What is it that you might be discussing about? Dates and location, if known. I preferably and strongly urge the dates, because that is key. Location, okay, that can still be sort of left out if necessary, but dates, at least say second week of November. And information about recruitment and the random sortition. You want to be as transparent as possible about this. You want to say how many letters have been sent out, how many people will be selected, what tools you will use to select this, what criteria you will use against which to achieve this representativeness. Possibly information about compensation. I know that some assemblies work without compensation, but statistically you will get twice as many answers of interest if you offer the participants some compensation. So you will have a larger pool of participants to choose from. This is why compensation is important. Another thing why it's important, it allows people who have less chances to participate, be this because irregular work schedules, taking care of someone. Nobody wants to miss work and lose that pay just so that they can participate in such a process. Compensating them for that is important. Irene is going to talk about inclusiveness in her workshop. Where is Irene? She's around, and she's going to touch on that as well. And finally, you want information to express, how to express interest. And this can be a phone, preferably toll-free. This can be a website. This can be other means. In Mostar, we also used an old-style ballot box located in the city hall so that elderly citizens who don't necessarily have technical skills or don't want to phone somebody can just fill in their information and put it into that box. Any other relevant information can also be included. But be aware, it's one page. Citizens won't read more than that one page. So anything that fits on one page, font 12, margins, you know the deal. A few more examples. So this is how the invitation looked for the National Assembly that I organized in Bosnia and Herzegovina on electoral and constitutional reform. Again, oversized. You have the three commissioning bodies. This was not commissioned by national authorities. This was commissioned by a group of international embassies and organizations. This is how the letter looked for the assembly in Mechelaar in Belgium. This is how the letter looked for the assembly in Poznań in Poland. And this is the expression of interest for that National Assembly letter I showed you earlier, with two options to express interest, phone and the website where you could register. So, once you have this letter, what do you do next? How do you organize this random sortition in practice? And I see my time is running out, so I'll move on through this swiftly. First, you have to collect the relevant information from all these people who want to be part of the assembly. So, what are these relevant criteria that you want to collect? Any idea? Age? Gender? All the general demographics, yes. So, education. You covered the main ones. What was that? Language, yes. Employment. Place of residence. Income. I think you have it all here. I mean, age, gender, education, socioeconomic status, residency, in which area you are, various forms of identity, be this linguistic, ethnic, religious. Attitudinal criteria is one we missed, which is optional depending on the policy issue. There can be other criteria as well. And these are marked in a way that the first 4 are the most important in a way. Residency, if it's a larger area, you want diversity in places of residency. Identity in some locations is key, and attitudinal criteria on issues, be this Brexit to abortion to anything else, climate change. You want some elements there included as well.
Quick question.
Yes?
So, sensitive issues like ethnicity, which could be interesting, but also racism and facts.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. So in Bosnia, we do have ethnicity, which is based on religion. And we do have, this is the next step, data on the proportion of people belonging to either ethnicity. So we ask people for their own identity preferences in this regard. We also have categories that say, do not identify. I do not identify, or I don't know. And these are included in an others category, which also has census data backing that up. So technically, you could say, I don't care, or I don't want to say, and then you would fall into a category that is not included as one of the major ethnic groups, but is included as either as a minority or as others. Ethnicity is also something that you can oversample on if the topic discussed relates to a particular ethnic group. For example, in Eastern Europe, this might be Roma. If you have an outsized Roma population in a community and you want to address issues relating to that community, you would want to oversample on that category. We can discuss oversampling. It's an entirely different thing. So, mirror assembly members and targeted demographic. Targeted demographic in this sense would be the city or the country, and the assembly should mirror that. Remember this huge group of random people and then those little people sitting around tables? Well, that's about this. So the question here is how to identify thresholds and specific target groups. First thing, you would want to collect demographic data as much as you can, and reliable. That's one word I forgot to put here, reliable demographic data. So it should come from as official sources as possible, statistics agencies, survey, census, and then you need to select thresholds that mirror this data, because cramming 5 million people into a 55-person room is sometimes difficult. You need to set thresholds within this. And then run a stratified selection using sortition software. This is how we do it today. And this is the question, how to ensure transparency and double randomness. I prefer triple randomness. The first one is sending out letters randomly. The second is using sortition software to select random lists, preferably more than one, and then use mostly a physical object to select which of these lists will be actually included. This is how we did it in Bosnia for the two assemblies. And be aware of protection for the databases that you use. So they should be pretty much secure with the persons doing this. And then you end up with this. It's a random group of people. Why are my pictures blurry? I don't know. These are just a few pictures of the people that we have selected, and they represent a pretty much random group of people in a room discussing policy issues. So, challenges. I'll run through this, and this is something we can also discuss about. If you care about any of these, write them down. Low response rates among citizens while expressing interests. Barriers for signing up to citizens' assemblies, be this IT knowledge, be this remote locations, or something else. Missing mobilizing certain demographics, be this, and I can tell you stories about single mothers on the one hand, and young men on the other hand, which are very difficult to get to. Bias and self-selection of active citizens. You always have overrepresentation of highly educated ones. Incomplete, outdated, faulty data that you rely on. A limited budget, which I'm having to deal with now in two assemblies. And how to keep citizens on board until the assembly starts, basically. So, I'm getting signs that I'm over time. This is the further reading. And moving on, we'll do a 5-minute break and reflect on this. You can prepare questions, and then we'll do a Q&A.